Agnes Langley thought justice was on her side, but when the judge ruled against her, she walked out of the courtroom in tears, her world shattered. Then a frail hand grabbed her wrist. A girl, barely more than a shadow, looked up at her and whispered, "Ma'am, I know how to get her back." What she said next changed everything. Want to know what happened? Watch until the end for a story full of twists and emotions. Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories. Agnes Langley sat in the courtroom, her hands clenched together, knuckles white. She had spent the past 6 months fighting for custody of Addison, her 6-year-old granddaughter, fighting against people with money, against a system that did not care. Her lawyer had tried, oh how he had tried, but it wasn't enough. The judge barely looked at her as he read the final ruling. The petition for guardianship is denied. Custody is awarded to Mr. and Mrs. Cooper. The words hit Agnes like a wrecking ball. She barely heard the rest. Something about providing stability, financial security, a better future for the child. As if love wasn't enough. As if the nights she spent rocking Addison to sleep after her mother's accident didn't count. As if the scraped knees she had kissed, the birthday cake she had baked, the lullabies she had sung, all meant nothing. She turned her head toward the other side of the courtroom, where the Coopers sat. Too perfect, too polished, too rehearsed. The husband's expensive suit, the wife's practiced sympathetic smile, and between them, Addison. Her small hands clutched the edge of her new mother's dress, her lips trembling, her eyes searching for Agnes. Tears burned Agnes's eyes, but she refused to cry. She had promised Addison she would be strong. But now it was over. The bailiff gestured for her to stand. The case was closed. Agnes was no longer her granddaughter's legal guardian. A sharp pain twisted in her chest as she stepped outside the courthouse. The cold air stung her skin, but nothing hurt more than the empty space in her arms where Addison should have been. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and took slow, uneven steps down the stairs, her body feeling twice as heavy as it had that morning. Then a small hand grabbed her wrist. Agnes turned sharply, startled. A girl stood there, thin, dirty, no older than 10. Her eyes, wide, dark, filled with something urgent, locked onto Agnes's. "Mom," she whispered, "I know how to get her back." Agnes frowned. Who was this child? Before she could speak, the girl stepped closer. "The judge," she said. "They paid him." Agnes froze. For the first time since stepping into that courtroom, she felt something stronger than grief. Rage. Agnes stood frozen on the courthouse steps, staring at the girl in front of her. Thin, dirty, eyes too old for her young face. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. "What did you say?" Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The girl glanced around, her shoulders hunching, as if she expected someone to grab her at any second. Then she stepped closer, tugging at Agnes's coat sleeve. "They paid the judge," she repeated, her voice urgent. "That's why you lost." Agnes's breath caught. They paid him. It made sense. Too much sense. The judge hadn't even looked at the evidence. He had ruled too fast, too easily, as if the decision had been made before Agnes even walked into that courtroom. But how did this girl know? Agnes finally found her voice. "Who are you?" The girl hesitated, then said, "Rosie." That name meant nothing to Agnes, but everything else about this child screamed survivor. She had seen kids like her before, on the edges of society, slipping through the cracks, invisible to the people who walked past them every day. But Rosie had seen something, and she wanted Agnes to know. "I need proof," Agnes said, gripping Rosie's arm, her fingers trembling. "If you're lying—" "I'm not," Rosie cut in. "I heard the man say it myself, the night before your hearing." Agnes's stomach twisted. "What man?" Rosie bit her lip. "I don't know his name, but I know where he lives." Agnes took a shaky breath. This was insane. A 10-year-old girl, a beggar, telling her that the judge had been bribed. It sounded like something out of a bad crime novel, and yet it explained everything. Her lawyer had said the case was tough but winnable. Agnes had shown she could take care of Addison. She had letters from teachers, doctors, even neighbors saying the girl was loved and safe. But none of it had mattered, because the Coopers had already bought their victory. A slow, burning anger replaced the grief in Agnes's chest. She had lost her granddaughter because of corruption. But if what Rosie said was true, then she wasn't out of options yet. Agnes looked the girl in the eye. "Show me." Rosie nodded, then turned and walked away without looking back. For the first time since she'd stepped into that courtroom, Agnes felt something stir deep inside her. Hope and a dangerous determination. She had nothing left to lose. Agnes hesitated only for a moment before following Rosie down the courthouse. Steps. The girl moved quickly, her small frame weaving through the crowd like a shadow. Agnes had no idea where they were going, but she knew one thing. She couldn't afford to stop now. Her whole life had been about playing by the rules. Trust the system. Respect the law. Do the right thing. But today, those rules had stolen Addison from her. If the system was rigged, she would have to break the rules to get her back. Rosie led her down a busy sidewalk, dodging pedestrians who barely noticed her presence. Agnes struggled to keep up, her knees aching, her breath uneven. "Slow down," she called. Rosie didn't. She only stopped when they reached a narrow alley between two buildings, a place that smelled of damp pavement. "And old cigarettes," Agnes hesitated. "Where are we?" Rosie turned to face her. "You said you wanted proof." The girl pointed toward a tall apartment building on the other side of the alley, the kind of place where rent was high, security was tight, and people with money lived. "Behind locked doors. That's where I heard them talking," Rosie said. "The man who paid the judge." Agnes's pulse quickened. This wasn't some rumor. Rosie had actually heard the bribe being arranged. "Who lives there?" Agnes asked. Rosie shook her head. "I don't know his name, but I've seen him before. He's got a nice car, fancy suit, the kind of guy who never looks at people like me." That description was enough. Agnes didn't know who the man was yet, but she knew exactly the kind of person he had to be. Someone with power, someone who thought he could buy whatever he wanted, including Addison. She clenched her fists. "How do we find out more?" Rosie hesitated. Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can sneak in." Agnes's stomach turned. "No, absolutely not. Rosie, that's too dangerous." The girl lifted her chin, defiant. "I've done it before. Nobody notices me. I can find out who he is, get something, anything, that proves what I heard." Agnes shook her head. "No, there has to be another way." Rosie hesitated, then let out a sigh. "Then we need help." "From who?" The girl looked her in the eye. "Todd Taylor." Agnes frowned. "Who?" Rosie crossed her arms. "A guy who used to care. A reporter. He tried to take these people. Down once, but they ruined his life." Agnes exhaled slowly. She had no reason to trust this girl, no reason to believe that some washed-up journalist could fix the mess she was in. But what choice did she have? She had already lost Addison. If there was even a chance to get her back, Agnes had to take it. She squared her shoulders. "Take me to him." Rosie smirked. "Thought you'd never ask." Agnes followed Rosie through the dimly lit streets, her heart pounding with every step. Todd Taylor. The name meant nothing to her, but Rosie spoke of him like he was the only person who could help. They stopped in front of a run-down diner on the outskirts of town. The neon sign above the entrance flickered, buzzing in the silence of the night. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee and stale fries. Rosie walked straight to the back booth, where a man sat hunched over a cup of coffee. His clothes were wrinkled, his dark hair streaked with grey, and there was something in his eyes. Something tired. "Todd," Rosie said, sliding into the booth across from him. He barely looked up. "Rosie." His voice was rough, edged with something Agnes couldn't quite place. Rosie jerked a thumb toward Agnes. "This is her, the one I told you about." Todd finally looked at her, and his sharp gaze made Agnes stiffen. "You're Addison's grandmother," he said. It wasn't a question. Agnes nodded, sitting down across from him. "I was." Todd exhaled, shaking his head. "I saw the ruling. It was fast, too fast." He tapped his fingers against the table, lost in thought. "Rosie says you think the judge was bribed." Agnes straightened. "Not think, I know." Todd let out a humorless chuckle. "That's a big accusation." Agnes narrowed her eyes. "You don't believe me?" "Oh, I believe you," Todd said, leaning back. "I just know that kind of truth doesn't change anything." Agnes's breath hitched. "What do you mean?" Todd studied her for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he pulled a crumpled napkin from the table and smoothed it out. 5 years ago, I started investigating a series of unusual adoptions. Low-income families, mostly single parents or grandparents, losing custody of their kids for vague reasons. Agnes felt her stomach tighten. Todd continued, his voice lower now. "The children weren't going to just anyone. They were being placed with wealthy couples, families with connections. Everything seemed legal except the judges kept changing at the last minute, and every case had one thing in common." He looked up at Agnes. "They always lost." The diner felt smaller, closing in on her. Todd sighed, rubbing his temples. "I tried to publish the story. The editor killed it. Then I lost my job. Then my apartment. Then my name." He gestured to his worn-out jacket. "Now, I'm here." Agnes swallowed hard. This was bigger than she thought. She forced herself to take a breath. "Then help me expose them." Todd let out a dry laugh. "Lady, if I couldn't do it then, what makes you think I can do it now?" Agnes leaned forward, her voice steady. "Because this time we have proof." Todd blinked. "What proof?" She turned to Rosie. The girl pulled out a small, scratched-up phone and placed it on the table. "I recorded everything," Rosie whispered. Todd stared at the phone. Then he looked at Agnes. For the first time, something flickered in his tired eyes. Hope. Todd stared at the battered phone sitting on the diner table. The small device looked harmless, insignificant. Yet Agnes could tell that whatever was inside had shaken him. Slowly, Todd reached for it. "Play it," he said, his voice low. Rosie nodded, pressing a few buttons. The phone's screen flickered weakly before the audio began, a crackling sound, the distant hum of city noise. Then, voices. "Relax, Cooper. The judge is in. He gets paid. The ruling goes your way. It's done." Agnes's breath caught. There it was. Richard Cooper's voice came next, lower, tense. "I don't like loose ends." "What about the grandmother?" Agnes clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. The first man, the briber, laughed. "She's nothing. She doesn't have the money to appeal. No lawyer will take her case. She'll cry a little, but she'll walk away." Todd let out a slow breath. "Damn." But the recording wasn't over. Richard's voice turned cold. "And once we finalize the transfer?" A brief pause. Then the briber's voice came back, casual. "Your part is done. The agency will take care of the rest. By the end of the month, the girl will be gone." Gone. Agnes felt the world tilt around. Her Richard hesitated before answering. "You mean placed?" The briber chuckled. "Call it what you want." Todd's jaw tightened. "They're selling her." Agnes gripped the edge of the table. Addison wasn't meant to stay with the Coopers. She was part of something much darker. If she didn't act soon, her granddaughter would disappear forever. Then, the final blow. Richard. Cooper's voice turned sharp. "And if the old woman causes problems?" The briber's response was calm. Too calm. "Then she disappears too." The phone clicked off. Silence filled the diner. For a long time, no one spoke. Todd rubbed a hand. Down his face. "Jesus Christ." Agnes swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, her mind racing. They were right. She had nothing. No lawyer, no money, no power. But she had this, and she wasn't about to walk away. She turned to Todd. "We need to go to the police." Todd let out a dry laugh. "And tell them what? That we have a recording made by a homeless kid? That a woman with no custody rights is accusing one of the most well-connected families in the city of child trafficking?" Agnes's stomach twisted. "But we have proof." Todd shook his head. "Not enough." She slammed her hands on the table. "Then what do we do?" Todd exhaled, staring at the scratched-up phone. Then his eyes flicked to Rosie. "How did you get this?" Rosie hesitated. "I was sleeping outside the restaurant when they talked. I hid behind a dumpster and recorded it." Todd frowned. "Did they see you?" Rosie shook her head. "No." Todd sighed. "That's the only reason you're still breathing." Agnes felt a chill run down her spine. If they knew Rosie had this, she'd be in danger too. Todd leaned forward, his voice serious. "Listen to me. You two have no idea what you're up against. If we make a wrong move, they'll make sure Addison disappears before we can do anything." Agnes clenched her fists. "So what do we do?" Todd took a deep breath. "We catch them in the act." Rosie frowned. "What do you mean?" Todd's eyes darkened. "We need them to confess, on record, and we need to do it before they get rid of Addison." Agnes's pulse pounded. This was their only shot, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever done in her life. Todd sat back in the booth, staring at the flickering neon sign outside the diner window. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on all of them. "This isn't just about a custody case," he muttered. "This is organized, and these people—" He exhaled, shaking his head. "They don't just let things go." Agnes's hands were clenched into fists. "I don't care who they are. I'm getting Addison back." Todd studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But we do this the right way." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We need to get them to talk. On tape. And we need to do it in a way they can't deny." Rosie's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "How do we do that?" Todd hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, stopping at one. A name flashed on the screen. "Detective Paul Weston." "Who's that?" Agnes asked. Todd sighed. "A cop who used to be good. Back when I was still a reporter, he was one of the few people who gave me information. If there's even a chance of finding someone who isn't. On Cooper's payroll, it's him." He tapped the screen, dialing. The phone rang. Once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell is this?" Todd glanced at Agnes and Rosie before responding. "It's me, Todd Taylor." A long silence. Then, click. The call ended. Agnes's heart sank. He hung up. Todd clenched his jaw. He's scared. They all are. Rosie shifted uncomfortably. "So what now?" Todd exhaled, thinking. "We set up a meeting with Cooper." Agnes's stomach twisted. "You want to go to him?" Todd nodded. "We give him a reason to talk, a reason to admit what he's done." Agnes shook her head. "Why would he ever do that?" Todd hesitated. Then his eyes flicked to Rosie. "Because we have something he doesn't know about." Rosie swallowed. "The recording." Todd nodded. "We use it as bait. We make him believe it's out there, that people are listening." Agnes's breath quickened. This was dangerous. If Cooper even suspected they were trying to trap him, Rosie frowned. "What if he doesn't take the bait?" Todd's expression hardened. "Then we're out of options." A heavy silence settled over them. Then Agnes took a deep breath, pushing away the fear that threatened to paralyze her. She had already lost Addison once. She wouldn't lose her again. She looked at Todd. "Let's do it." Todd met her gaze. Then, without another word, he picked up his phone and started typing. "To Richard Cooper, we need to talk. Tonight." He hit send. Now there was no turning back. Todd's message had been sent. Now all they could do was wait. Agnes sat in the dimly lit diner, her hands wrapped tightly around a lukewarm cup of coffee. Her stomach churned. This wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. They were about to walk straight into the lion's den. Rosie fidgeted beside her, tapping her foot against the linoleum floor. What if he doesn't show? Todd checked his phone. No reply. He'll come. Agnes glanced at him. How can you be so sure? Todd exhaled. Because men like Richard Cooper don't like loose ends, and right now we're one big loose end. At 8:45 p.m., Todd's phone buzzed. One new message. Richard Cooper, 10 p.m. Pier 17. Come alone. Todd cursed under his breath. A damn pier. That's not a meeting spot. That's a setup. Agnes's stomach twisted. So what do we do? Todd leaned forward. We go, but we're not walking in blind. Rosie tilted her head. You got a plan? Todd smirked. Of course I have a plan. We record everything. We get him talking, make him say something incriminating. Then we get the hell out of there before he realizes what's happening. Agnes folded her arms. And if it goes wrong? Todd didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew the risk. The air at Pier 17 was cold, thick with the salty scent of the ocean. Fog curled around the docks, swallowing the dim streetlights in the distance. Todd, Agnes and Rosie arrived 10 minutes early, hiding in the shadows near an abandoned shipping container. At 9:59, headlights sliced through the mist. A sleek black SUV pulled up, its tires grinding against the concrete. The back door opened, and Richard Cooper stepped out. Agnes's breath caught. He looked exactly the same as he had in court. Calm, polished, untouchable. Except this time, there was something else in his eyes. Danger. Two other men stepped out of the car behind him, tall, broad, silent. Cooper took a slow step forward, adjusting the cuffs of his designer coat. His gaze swept over Todd, then Agnes. Then his eyes landed on Rosie. Something flickered across his face. Recognition. Agnes's stomach dropped. He knew who she was. Todd stepped forward, keeping his voice steady. We need to talk. Cooper raised an eyebrow. Do we? Todd pulled out his phone. We know about the judge, about the bribes. We have proof, Cooper. Cooper let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Is that what you think? His voice was smooth, patronizing. You don't have proof. You have a street rat and a washed-up journalist grasping at ghosts. Agnes clenched her fists. You stole my granddaughter. Cooper finally looked at her. She's not your granddaughter anymore. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Todd took a slow breath. It's over, Cooper. The moment this conversation ends, this goes public. For the first time, Cooper's jaw tightened. Good. He was nervous. Todd pressed forward. Tell me something, Cooper. What happens to Addison after you hand her off? Where does she go? Cooper's lips twitched. Far away. Todd's fingers hovered over his phone. He just needed one clear confession. One sentence that could blow this whole thing open. And then Cooper smiled. Agnes's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Do you think I came here alone? Cooper murmured. Todd's blood ran cold. Then, out of the corner of his eye, a shadow moved. Before Agnes could react, two men lunged out of the darkness. One grabbed Todd, slamming him against a container. The other lunged for Agnes, yanking her backward. Rosie screamed. Todd struggled, gasping as the man's arm pressed against his throat. His phone slipped from his grip, clattering onto the ground. Cooper stooped down and picked it up. He turned, the screen toward them, smirking. This? He laughed. This is nothing. Then he dropped the phone and crushed it under his heel. Agnes fought against the arms restraining her. Where is she? Where is Addison? Cooper leaned in close, his voice chillingly soft. Already gone. No, 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 no. The men tightened their grip. Agnes struggled, but it was useless. Cooper took a step back, straightening his coat. He gave them one final glance, then turned away. Then tires screeched, headlights flashed. A new car, unmarked, speeding toward the pier. Cooper's men spun toward it, shouting. Agnes's heart leapt. Was it the police? The car skidded to a stop, and the driver's door flew open. A tall figure stepped out, wearing a badge clipped to his belt. Detective Paul Weston. He raised his gun. Step away from the woman, now. Cooper's expression flickered, with the briefest moment of panic, but he recovered quickly, his lips curling into a smirk. Detective Weston. Weston's jaw tightened. Let them go. One of the men holding Agnes hesitated. Cooper sighed. Stand down. Immediately, the grip on Agnes and Todd loosened. Rosie darted out of reach, running to Agnes's side. Weston kept his gun steady. You're done, Cooper. Cooper just smiled. You don't have anything on me. Todd coughed, staggering forward. We have the recording. He froze. His phone. Destroyed. Weston lowered his weapon slightly, glancing at Todd. Tell me, you have a backup. Silence. Todd's face went pale. No backup. Cooper laughed. Agnes felt the world collapsing around her. They had lost everything. And worst of all, Addison was still gone. Agnes felt her knees go weak. No backup. No recording. No proof. And worst of all, Addison was still gone. Richard Cooper stood at the edge of the pier, his smirk never faltering. He thought he had won. Detective Weston lowered his gun, his frustration barely contained. Damn it, he muttered. Without evidence, I can't hold him. Cooper adjusted his cuffs. Then I'll be leaving, Agnes snapped. Where is she? Cooper didn't answer. He simply turned away, heading toward his SUV. Agnes lunged forward, grabbing his arm. Where is my granddaughter? Cooper smiled, that same smug, untouchable grin. She's already gone, he murmured. And you'll never see her again. Agnes swung. Her hand collided with his face, a sharp crack echoing across the pier. Cooper stumbled back, stunned, his smirk finally fading. But before Agnes could do anything else, one of his men shoved her. Backward, she hit the ground hard, pain shooting up her spine. Weston reacted instantly. He grabbed the thug, twisting his arm behind his back, but Cooper had already reached his car. The SUV roared to life. Todd stumbled to Agnes's side. We can't let him leave, Weston cursed under his breath. Without proof, I can't stop him legally. Agnes didn't care about legal. She looked at Rosie, and Rosie, eyes wide, suddenly gasped. Wait, I have it. I have the backup. Agnes's heart slammed against her ribs. What? Rosie fumbled in her pocket, pulling out her own phone. She held it up, her hands trembling. I made a copy right before we left. Todd's eyes widened. Weston snatched the phone and pressed play. And there it was, the entire conversation from the restaurant. Weston didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio. We have proof of child trafficking. I repeat, we have proof. Lock down the roads. Arrest Richard Cooper. The SUV sped forward. Weston raised his gun. Bang! A shot rang out. The front tire exploded, and the SUV spun out of control, crashing into a lamppost. The doors flew open. Cooper stumbled out, furious. Weston was on him in seconds, slamming him. Onto the hood of the car. You're done, Cooper, Weston growled. Cooper laughed. Even now, even knowing it was over. You have nothing, he sneered. Weston pulled out the phone. He pressed play. Cooper's own voice filled the air. By the end of the month, the girl will be gone. Call it what you want. Then she disappears too. The color drained from Cooper's face. Todd let out a breath. I think that's enough. Weston nodded. Yeah. He yanked Cooper's arms behind his back, slapping handcuffs onto his wrists. It was over. Cooper's men tried to run, but sirens blared in the distance. Police. Cars swarmed the pier, officers jumping out with weapons drawn. One by one they were taken down, but none of it mattered. Not yet. Agnes stumbled forward, grabbing Weston's arm. Where is Addison? She pleaded. Where did they take her? Weston grabbed Cooper, shaking him. Where is the girl? Cooper pressed his lips together. Silent. Todd stepped forward. You're already going down, but if you don't tell us where she is... He paused, voice dropping to a whisper. You'll be charged with murder too. Cooper's jaw tightened. For the first time... He looked afraid. Agnes's breath hitched. Then finally, he spoke. Less than an hour later, police cars screeched to a stop outside a secluded house deep in the woods. A warehouse. Agnes's heart pounded as officers rushed inside. Weapons drawn. Weston was the first through the door. Police! Hands where we can see them! Crates! Empty chairs! A smell of damp concrete, and then a cry. Agnes's breath caught. Todd ran ahead, pulling open a door at the back of the warehouse. And there, curled up in a corner, eyes wide with fear, Addison. Agnes sprinted forward, her legs shaking. "Addison!" she cried. The little girl looked up, her face crumpled. "Grandma!" Agnes dropped to her knees, pulling Addison into her arms, sobbing. "I'm here, baby, I've got you." Addison clung to her, shaking. "I knew you'd come." Agnes squeezed her tighter, pressing kisses into her granddaughter's hair. "I'll never let them take you again." Tears blurred her vision. She had her back. She had won. 1 month later, the trial was swift and brutal. With the recording, Richard. Cooper was sentenced to life in prison. The judge who took the bribes arrested, the adoption agency shut down permanently, and every single child involved in the illegal trafficking ring was found and rescued. On a crisp morning, Agnes sat on the porch watching Addison play in the yard. She was safe, happy, home. Beside her, Rosie leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "So, guess this means I'm out of a job." Agnes smirked. "You don't have to go anywhere, you know." Rosie hesitated. "I don't?" Agnes shook her head. "You helped save my granddaughter. You saved all of them. You deserve a home, too." Rosie swallowed hard. "I never had a real home before." Agnes smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Well, now you do." Rosie's arms tightened around her. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Agnes looked out at the yard, Addison laughing, the sun warm on her face. Everything had changed, but one thing was certain: no one would ever take her family away again. Wow, what a journey. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, if it made you feel something, hope, anger, relief, then you're exactly the kind of person we want here. We tell stories that matter, stories that make you think, that remind you of the power of justice, love, and resilience. So if you enjoyed this one, hit that subscribe button, not just so you don't miss our next story, but because these stories deserve to be heard. And hey, if you're already subscribed, thank you. You're part of this journey, and we couldn't do it without you. See you in the next story.